How Mossad found Egypt's mastermind, relaxing in a jacuzzi, and ended him. Before we descend into the shadow world of espionage, the silent corridors of luxury hotels, and the high-stakes game of international cat and mouse, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We are uncovering the operations that governments deny and the history that is often written in invisible ink. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the archives of intelligence history. The year was 1982. The location was Cairo, but the mind of General Nabil El-Masri was far away, drifting through the schematics of a guidance system that shouldn't exist. To the outside world, Egypt and Israel were in a state of cold peace. The Camp David Accords had been signed years prior. The borders were open, ambassadors had been exchanged, and the wars of tanks and fighter jets were supposedly over. But in the dim, smoke-filled offices of the Mukhabarat and the military-industrial complex, the war had simply changed frequency. It had moved from the battlefield to the laboratory, and from the open desert to the back alleys of European capitals. General El-Masri was not a man who looked like a threat. He was 55, balding with a penchant for expensive Italian suits and a soft, grandfatherly demeanor. He did not carry a gun. He carried a briefcase. He did not command divisions of tanks. He commanded a network of shell companies stretching from Panama to Vienna. He was the mastermind, the unseen architect of a program designed to bypass the restrictions of the peace treaty. His goal was simple: to acquire the technology for a ballistic missile guidance system so precise it could threaten Tel Aviv from deep within the African continent, all while shaking hands with Israeli diplomats in public. El-Masri was a ghost. He never slept in the same bed for more than 3 nights when he traveled. He avoided direct flights. He had no digital footprint because the digital age was only just dawning, and he preferred the analog safety of handwritten ledgers and face-to-face whispers. But every man has a weakness, a crack in the armor where the light or a knife can get in. For the general, it was not money, and it was not ideology. It was his back. A legacy of a Jeep accident during the War of Attrition in 1969, his lower lumbar vertebrae were a constant source of agony. It was a pain that demanded relief, a specific kind of relief found only in the bubbling, heated waters of hydrotherapy. In Tel Aviv, the analysts at the Institute, Mossad, had a file on El-Masri. It was codenamed Pharaoh's Shadow. For months the file had been thin. They knew someone was buying high-grade gyroscopes in Germany. They knew someone was procuring miraging steel in Belgium. But they couldn't connect the dots to a single face. The network was too compartmented, the cutouts too numerous. That changed on a rainy Tuesday in November. A junior analyst in the research division, working a late shift, noticed a pattern in the travel logs of a known Egyptian procurement officer. The officer wasn't visiting factories. He was visiting luxury spas in Austria, Switzerland, and Italy. And he wasn't going alone. He was always accompanying a VIP guest, listed under various pseudonyms. The analyst flagged the anomaly. Why would a military logistics officer spend weeks at the Grand Hotel in Rome or the spas of Baden-Baden? The file moved up the chain of command. It landed on the desk of Mike Harari's successor in the Caesarea unit, the division responsible for special operations. The order came down from the Prime Minister's office, stamped with the highest classification. The Cold Peace did not allow for an Egyptian nuclear-capable missile program. The mastermind had to be stopped. But he couldn't just be arrested. That would cause a diplomatic incident that could rupture the peace treaty. He had to be resolved. The hunt did not begin with a gun. It began with a wiretap in Zurich. Mossad's technological unit, the Neviot, had managed to compromise the phone line of a Swiss banking firm known for handling gray market arms deals. The target wasn't El-Masri directly. He was too smart for that. But a middleman named Dieter, a Swiss national who facilitated payments for agricultural equipment that was actually missile-grade electronics. Avner, the field commander chosen for this operation, sat in a cramped van disguised as a plumbing service vehicle, parked 3 streets away from the bank. He wore headphones, listening to the static-laced recording of a call intercepted 3 hours earlier. "The client is demanding the shipment by the end of the month." Dieter's voice was nervous. "He is coming to Europe personally to inspect the merchandise. He says the calibration must be perfect." "Where will he be?" a voice on the other end asked. The accent was Arabic, but the language was English. "Rome," Dieter replied. "He requires the usual accommodations. The therapy facilities." "Understood. The Excelsior, the executive suite. Ensure the private wellness room is reserved every night from 10 p.m. to midnight. He requires total privacy for his back treatment." Avner took off the headphones. He looked at the other two operatives in the van. "Rome," he said quietly. "The Excelsior. And we have a time window." The Jacuzzi lead was confirmed. The intelligence assessment regarding El Masri's back pain was accurate. The general wasn't just going to Rome for business. He was going for the cure. He needed the hot water, the jets, the solitude. It was his ritual, and rituals are the death of security. Back in Tel Aviv, the operational planning began in earnest. The Caesarea unit assembled a team of Kedon, the Spear. These were not James Bond caricatures. They were men and women who looked like accountants, tourists, and bored business travelers. They could melt into a hotel lobby like smoke. The objective was clear. Confirm the target is El Masri. Confirm the nature of the transaction. And then, execute a quiet removal. There could be no explosion, no public shootout, no headlines screaming, "Israeli spies kill Egyptian general." It had to look like an accident, a medical emergency, or a simple disappearance. The team selected for the mission consisted of 6 operatives. Avner was the lead. Sarah, a specialist in human intelligence and covert identities, would play the role of a wealthy French tourist. Danny and Yossi were surveillance experts. And then there were the technicians, 2 men whose names never appeared on any roster, carrying a specialized kit that contained no firearms, but tools far more lethal. They flew into Rome separately. Avner arrived from Brussels, Sarah from Paris. The technicians came via a circuitous route through Athens. They carried Canadian and British passports, identities built on the legends of real people who had never left their home villages. Rome in the early 80s was a city of chaotic beauty, political tension, and endless shadows. The Red Brigades were active, the police were on edge, and the city was awash in foreign spies. It was the perfect playground for El Masri. He felt safe there. He believed the peace treaty gave him immunity. He believed the Italians were too disorganized to track him, and the Israelis too afraid of diplomatic fallout to touch him. He was wrong. The Hotel Excelsior on the Via Veneto is a monument to Roman opulence. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and a lobby that hums with the quiet conversations of the world's elite. It is a fortress of luxury. For a man like General El Masri, it was the only acceptable standard. Sarah checked in 2 days before the general's expected arrival. She was booked into a room on the 3rd floor, using the identity of a fashion buyer for a Parisian boutique. She spent the first 24 hours doing nothing but observing. She sat in the lobby cafe, sipping espresso, watching the staff, learning the rhythm of the shifts. She noted the security personnel, burly men in ill-fitting suits who stood near the elevators. Egyptian security. The general was cautious, but not cautious enough. El Masri arrived on a Thursday. He did not enter through the main revolving doors. His limousine pulled into the underground garage, and he was whisked up a private service elevator to the 5th floor. Mossad surveillance teams outside caught only a glimpse of the car, but the license plate matched the embassy vehicle. "Target is on site." Danny radioed from a parked Fiat across the street. "The package has been delivered." Avner was in a rented apartment 3 blocks away, staring at a blueprint of the hotel. The 5th floor was the executive level. The wellness room, the suite with the private jacuzzi, was located at the end of the corridor. It was designed for VIPs who didn't want to mix with the common guests in the main spa. "He will be in that room tonight," Avner said, tracing the line on the map. 10 p.m., just like the intercept said. The challenge was access. The 5th floor was guarded. The Egyptian security team had stationed a man at the elevator bank and another at the stairwell. They were creating a sterile zone. "We can't go through the hallway," Yossi said, looking at the photos Sarah had surreptitiously taken of the lobby layout. "If we engage the guards, it gets noisy. The police arrive in 3 minutes." "We don't need the hallway," Avner replied. He pointed to the exterior of the building on the blueprint. "We need the plumbing." The plan was audacious. If they couldn't get to the general through the door, they would get to him through the very thing he desired most: the water. But tampering with the hotel's water supply was risky and imprecise. They needed to get closer. They needed to get into the room before he did, or find a way to access the ventilation system directly above the jacuzzi. Sarah made the first move. Dressed in an elegant evening gown, she approached the concierge. She played the part of the distressed, wealthy guest perfectly. "My room is terribly drafty," she complained in rapid-fire French. "I simply cannot sleep." "Is there anything on the upper floors? Perhaps a suite?" The concierge checked his ledger. "I am sorry, madame. The 5th floor is fully booked for a diplomatic delegation." "Diplomatic?" She raised an eyebrow. "Well, surely they don't occupy every room." "I am afraid they have secured the entire wing." Information confirmed. The entire wing. That meant multiple rooms, likely occupied by security and support staff. El Masri was cocooned. Avner changed the strategy. "If we can't get in, we wait for him to come out?" "No. He's too exposed. We have to wait for him to be vulnerable. We have to wait for the water." The team needed to know exactly what happened inside that wellness suite. They needed eyes and ears. The technicians, Eli and Modi, went to work. They couldn't drill holes in the walls of a 5-star hotel. They had to be smarter. On Friday morning, disguised as maintenance workers for the city's electrical grid, a cover that allowed them to work on the street junction box outside the hotel, they managed to tap into the hotel's internal communication lines. It wasn't enough to hear the room, but it allowed them to track the room service orders. At 9:45 p.m., a call came from the 5th floor. 2 bottles of mineral water and fresh towels to the wellness suite. The general is preparing. He's punctual, Avner noted. The crucial flaw in the Egyptian security detail was arrogance. They assumed the threat would come from a gunman bursting through the door. They didn't anticipate the threat already being inside the infrastructure. Avner decided on a soft entry into an adjacent room. The room directly above the wellness suite on the 6th floor was occupied by a businessman from Milan. Mossad needed that room. Sarah was deployed again. It was a classic honey trap maneuver, but not for the target. It was for the bystander. She accidentally spilled a drink on the businessman in the bar, struck up a conversation, and within an hour had charmed him. She didn't need to sleep with him. She just needed him out of his room or distracted. She suggested they go to a jazz club in Trastevere. He agreed, eager for the company of the beautiful French woman. As soon as they left the hotel, Avner and the technicians moved. They picked the lock of room 602 effortlessly. Now they were directly above the target. The floor of room 602 was the ceiling of the wellness suite. The technicians used a stethoscope-like device to listen through the floorboards. They could hear the hum of the jacuzzi pumps below. They could hear the splash of water. "He's in," Eli whispered. "Is he alone?" Avner asked. They listened. There were no voices, just the sound of water churning and the occasional groan of a man finding relief from chronic pain. "He's alone," Eli confirmed. "The guards are likely outside the door in the corridor." The plan was not to shoot through the floor. That was Hollywood nonsense. The plan was to introduce a resolving agent into the ventilation system that fed the bathroom below. Mossad chemists had developed a nebulized compound based on an opioid derivative. It was odorless, colorless, and mimicked the effects of extreme fatigue followed by cardiac arrest. In the heat and steam of a jacuzzi, it would look like the general simply fell asleep and his heart gave out. A tragedy common among overweight men of his age in hot baths. But there was a problem. The ventilation ducts in the Excelsior were old. The airflow wasn't direct. If they released the gas, it might dissipate or, worse, spread to other rooms. "We can't risk collateral damage," Avner said. "Abort the gas." They needed another way. They needed to get into the room with him. Saturday. The general had one more night in Rome before meeting the German suppliers. This was the final window. Avner spent the night analyzing the hotel's service routines. He watched the housekeeping staff, the room service trolleys, the laundry carts. He noticed a pattern. Every night at 9:30 p.m., a trolley with fresh towels and robes was left in the service alcove on the 5th floor, ready for the general's session. The security guard would check the cart, wave it through, and a hotel staff member would wheel it to the suite door. "The cart," Avner said. "That's the Trojan horse." It was too small to hide a man, but it was big enough to hide a device. Or perhaps they could replace the staff member. No, the Egyptians knew the regular staff. A new face would trigger an alarm. "We replace the robes," Sarah suggested. "Contact poison? Too dangerous for the staff handling it," the toxicologist advised. And the autopsy would find it. They went back to the accident theory, the jacuzzi itself. One of the technicians, Moti, had an idea. The maintenance access, behind the tub. Every jacuzzi has a service panel for the pump motor. Usually, it's accessible from the adjacent room or a service corridor. They checked the blueprints again. There was a narrow service chase, a vertical shaft running between the rooms for pipes and wiring. It was tight, dirty, and hot, but a small man could fit. "I can do it," Danny said. He was the smallest of the team, a former gymnast before he became a spy. The plan was set. Danny would enter the service chase from the 6th floor, using the businessman's room again, provided Sarah could keep him occupied for another night, and climb down the inside of the wall. He would reach the access panel behind the general's jacuzzi. And then, he would disable the temperature regulator. He would rig the electrical system. "No," Avner said. "Too complex. If he's in the service chase, he's inches away from the target. We drill. A micro drill. A hole no bigger than a needle through the back of the service panel or the wall tile. And then, a pressurized injection of the sedative directly into the steam-filled air of the room, right next to the bather's head. Or, if the angle allowed, a pneumatic dart. A needle," Avner decided. "A pneumatic syringe through the wall. He won't even feel the prick in the hot water. He'll think it's a mosquito or a muscle twitch. 10 minutes later, he drowns." It was grim. It was cold. But it was necessary. The missiles El Masri was building were designed to carry chemical warheads. The calculation was simple. One life to save thousands. The night of the operation arrived. The atmosphere in Rome was heavy with impending rain. The humidity was high, matching the tension in the team's veins. Sarah secured the businessman again. This time it was harder. He was tired. She had to feign a romantic crisis to get him out of the room, dragging him for a late-night walk to the Spanish Steps. As soon as the door to 602 closed, Avner, Danny, and Eli moved in. They locked the door and moved the wardrobe that covered the access panel to the service chase. Danny stripped down to black tactical gear, carrying only a flashlight, the micro drill, and the pneumatic device loaded with the compound. He wore a mask to protect himself from the dust and potential fumes. "Radio check," Avner whispered. "Solid," Danny replied. His voice was calm, but his pulse was visible in his neck. He squeezed into the dark, narrow shaft. It smelled of old concrete, dust, and rat droppings. Pipes hissed with hot water. Wires dangled like jungle vines. He braced his legs against the brickwork and began the slow, claustrophobic descent. 1 meter, 2 meters. He reached the level of the 5th floor. He could feel the heat radiating from the pipes feeding the jacuzzi. He pressed his ear against the thin service panel that separated him from the wellness suite. He heard the water, the bubbling jets, and then the heavy rhythmic breathing of General El Masri. The target was in the tub. Danny signaled to Avner above using a coded tap on the microphone. In position, he took the micro drill. It was a specialized tool, silent, using a diamond bit. He located a spot in the grout line between the tiles, calculated to be just above the water line, near where the user's head would rest against the back of the tub. He began to drill. The sound was barely a hum, drowned out by the noise of the jacuzzi jets. Millimeter by millimeter, he bored through the plaster and ceramic. Inside the suite, General El Masri closed his eyes. The hot water soothed the fire in his spine. He felt safe. He was thinking about the guidance chips. He was thinking about his retirement villa in Alexandria. He didn't see the tiny dusting of white powder fall into the water near his left shoulder. Danny withdrew the drill bit. A hole, less than 2 millimeters wide, was now open. He aligned the pneumatic syringe. It was a gas-powered delivery system, designed to fire a microscopic dissolvable flechette, a tiny needle made of hardened ice and toxin that would melt upon impact. leaving no ballistic evidence. He looked through a fiber optic scope inserted into the hole. He saw the back of a wet, bald head. The general was leaning back, eyes closed, right in the line of fire. Target acquired, Danny thought. But then the door to the suite opened. Danny froze. "General?" a voice boomed. It was the head of security. El Masri sat up, splashing water. "What is it, Ahmed? I told you, no interruptions." "Sir, there is a call from Cairo. Urgent. The minister." Danny held his breath. If the general got out now, the opportunity was lost. The hole in the wall might be discovered. "Tell the minister I will call him back in 20 minutes. El Masri snapped. "I am in the middle of treatment." "He insists, sir." The general sighed, a sound of deep frustration. "Bring the phone here, the long cord." Danny watched through the scope. The security guard walked in, extending a white telephone handset with a long, coiled cord toward the tub. The general wiped his hands on a towel and took the phone. "Yes?" El Masri barked into the receiver. The guard stayed in the room. This was a disaster. Danny couldn't fire with a witness. The natural death cover would be blown instantly if the general slumped over while talking on the phone. Danny waited. His muscles burned from bracing against the walls of the shaft. The heat was suffocating. The conversation dragged on. It was about budget allocations. Boring, bureaucratic, banal. The mundane details of evil. Finally, El Masri handed the phone back. "Get out, Ahmed. Close the door." "Yes, sir." The guard left. The lock clicked. El Masri slid back into the water, grumbling. He adjusted his position, leaning his head back against the rim, right back into the target zone. Danny exhaled slowly. He realigned the device. 3, 2, 1. The space inside the service shaft was a vertical coffin of brick and pipe, insulated from the world of luxury only by a thin layer of plaster and tile. Danny's breathing was shallow, regulated by years of conditioning. He was not a killer in that moment. He was a mechanic of history, a technician adjusting the timeline of the Middle East by a fraction of an inch. Through the fiber optic scope, the image was grainy but clear. General El Masri had settled back against the porcelain rim of the tub. The water jets churned, creating a white noise that masked the universe outside. The general's eyes were closed, his head tilted back, exposing the soft vulnerability of the neck and the upper trapezius. He looked peaceful, a man whose burdens were momentarily lifted by the heat and the steam. Danny adjusted the pressure valve on the pneumatic device. It was a piece of engineering genius, crafted by the technical artisans of the Covert Technology Unit. It did not use gunpowder. It used compressed nitrogen, silent and recoil-free. The projectile was not lead. It was a frozen polymer toxin composite, soluble in water and blood, designed to vanish within seconds of impact. He aligned the crosshairs. The distance was less than 12 inches from the nozzle to the target. The trajectory was a straight line through the drilled hole, across the gap of air above the water, to the skin. Psh! The sound was softer than a whisper, lost entirely in the gurgle of the hydrotherapy pumps. On the other side of the wall, General El Masri flinched. It was a small, reflexive jerk, the kind one makes when a drop of cold water falls from the ceiling or a mosquito bites. He reached up with a wet hand to scratch his neck, rubbing the spot where the flechette had entered. Danny watched, unmoving. The flechette had already dissolved. The toxin, a sophisticated compound mimicking a massive potassium surge, was entering the bloodstream. It would race to the heart, overriding the electrical signals that kept the rhythm of life. The general frowned. He seemed confused. He rubbed his chest, feeling a sudden tightness. He shifted in the water, the displacement sending waves slapping against the sides of the tub. He opened his mouth to call out, perhaps for Ahmed, perhaps for water, but the air in his lungs felt heavy, like lead. His eyes widened, not in horror, but in profound bewilderment. The lethargy hit him like a physical weight. His hand dropped back into the water, his head lolled forward, then tipped back against the rim. To an observer, he simply looked like a man succumbing to the deepest sleep of his life. The heart fluttered, fibrillation, and then stopped. The brain, deprived of oxygen, shut down the lights, room by room. The general slid slightly lower in the tub, the water buoying him up, the jets continuing their endless, indifferent cycle. Danny waited a full 2 minutes. He checked for chest rise. There was none. The target was neutralized. Clear, he whispered into his throat mic. Now began the ascent. The climb up the shaft was infinitely harder than the descent. Gravity fought him. The adrenaline that had sharpened his senses began to curdle into fatigue. He braced his boots against the rough brick, hauling himself up hand over hand, the equipment tapping softly against his tactical vest. He reached the access panel of room 602. Avner and Eli were there, their faces masks of tension. They grabbed Danny's harness and hauled him through the opening, into the air-conditioned cool of the hotel room. They moved with practiced speed. The panel was replaced. The wardrobe was slid back into position, its feet aligned perfectly with the indentations in the carpet. Danny stripped off the tactical gear, sealing it into an airtight bag. He dressed in the clothes of a maintenance worker. Avner checked the room. A wipe-down of surfaces, a check for hair, fibers, dust. They left the room exactly as they found it, an empty stage waiting for the next act. Chapter 8. The Art of Walking Away. The most dangerous moment in any operation is not the act itself, but the immediate aftermath. The vacuum created by the event draws attention. Chaos is about to erupt, and the operatives must be nowhere near the epicenter when the shockwave hits. They exited room 602 separately. Danny and Eli took the service elevator down to the basement, blending in with the late-night shift change of the hotel engineering staff. They walked out the loading dock carrying toolboxes that contained the disassembly of the weapon. They looked tired, bored, invisible. Avner took the main elevator to the lobby. He walked with the confidence of a guest, nodding to the night manager. He stepped out into the Roman night, the air thick with the scent of rain and exhaust. He walked 2 blocks east before hailing a taxi. Sarah was the last loose end. She was still with the businessman at the Spanish Steps. She checked her watch. The signal had come through on her pager, a single-digit code. Done. She turned to her companion. "Marco," she said, feigning a sudden wave of exhaustion. "The wine. It has gone to my head. I must return." He offered to escort her. This was a risk. If he came back to the hotel, he might see the commotion if the body was discovered early, or he might try to come up to the room. "No," she said firmly, touching his arm. "My husband. He calls at this hour. It is complicated. Put me in a taxi." He was disappointed. But the complexity of the lie, the husband, the forbidden romance, played into the drama he expected from a beautiful French woman. He hailed a cab. As she drove away, she watched him standing on the corner, a witness who would remember a woman who didn't exist. Back at the Hotel Excelsior, the water in the wellness suite continued to bubble. It was 11:15 p.m. The security guard, Ahmed, checked his watch. The general usually finished by 11 song. Ahmed knocked on the door. "General?" No answer. "General El Masri?" Silence. Just the hum of the pumps. Ahmed tried the handle. Locked. He used his passkey. The door swung open, releasing a cloud of warm steam into the cool corridor. "Sir?" He walked into the bathroom. The scene was peaceful. The general appeared to be resting. Ahmed stepped closer, his shoes squeaking on the wet tile. He reached out and touched the general's shoulder. The skin was hot from the water, but the muscle underneath had no tension. The head rolled unnaturally to the side. Ahmed's scream was suppressed by training, but his panic was instant. He pulled the general from the water, slipping on the wet floor, shouting for the medic. By the time the hotel doctor arrived, 10 minutes had passed. By the time the Egyptian embassy physician arrived, it was 20. They attempted CPR, cracking ribs in the process, but they were trying to jumpstart an engine that had already been dismantled. The verdict in the room was hushed and terrified. "Heart failure," the embassy doctor whispered. The heat, the stress, his weight. They didn't look for a puncture mark less than a millimeter wide on the back of the neck. They didn't look for a toxin that had already metabolized into harmless organic compounds. They saw what they expected to see. A middle-aged man who had lived too hard and died in luxury. Chapter 9. The Protocol of Shadows. The city of Rome did not sleep, but the team moved through its veins like a virus leaving a host. They had activated the dispersal protocol. No 2 operatives were on the same flight. No 2 used the same exit point. Avner took a train to Milan, then a rental car across the border to Switzerland. He would fly from Zurich. Danny and Eli took a ferry to Corsica, then a flight to Marseille. Sarah took the morning train to Paris, resuming her cover identity so seamlessly that she complained to the conductor about the coffee. But intelligence operations rarely end without a tremor. As Avner sat in the train compartment, watching the Italian countryside blur past, he noticed a man in the corridor. A man reading a newspaper, but not reading it. The eyes were scanning, reflecting off the glass of the compartment door. Avner's heart rate did not change, but his awareness expanded. Had they been burned? Had the Egyptians locked down the exits faster than anticipated? The man lingered. He was wearing a gray suit, typical of Italian internal security. He looked at Avner, then moved on. Avner relaxed his grip on the hidden pocket of his jacket. Paranoia was a professional hazard. It kept you alive, but it also ate at your sanity. The man was likely just looking for a seat or a cigarette. Meanwhile, in the Hotel Excelsior, the situation was evolving from a medical emergency to a diplomatic crisis. The Egyptian ambassador had arrived. The Italian police were holding the perimeter, confused and annoyed by the Egyptians' refusal to allow a standard autopsy. "He is a diplomat," the ambassador insisted to the Roman police chief. "He died of natural causes. We are claiming jurisdiction over the remains," the Italians argued. A death in a hotel required investigation, but the pressure from Cairo was immense. The cold peace meant that neither side wanted a scandal. If the Italians found evidence of foul play, it would force an international inquiry. It would expose the missile program. It would expose the incompetence of Egyptian security. Cairo wanted the body back. They wanted the file closed. This desire for secrecy was Mossad's greatest ally. The Egyptians were doing the cover-up work for them. By insisting on a quick repatriation of the body to avoid exposing the general's secret mission, they were ensuring that a detailed forensic toxicology screen, the only thing that might have detected the anomaly, would never happen in an independent lab. The German supplier, the man El Masri was supposed to meet, arrived at the hotel at 9 a.m. the next morning. He saw the police cars. He saw the embassy vehicles. He didn't walk in. He turned around, walked to a payphone, made one call, and then headed straight for Fiumicino Airport. The network was reacting, the spider was dead, and the web was trembling. Chapter 10. The Invisible War, Jerusalem. 3 days later. Avner sat in a small, sunlit office in the headquarters of the Mossad. The air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the Roman service shaft. Across the desk sat the director. "The Egyptians have repatriated the body," the director said, reading from a file. "Official cause of death, acute myocardial infarction, buried with full military honors yesterday in Cairo." Avner nodded. "And the reaction?" "Quiet confusion. They suspect something, of course. The timing is too convenient. But they have no proof, no bullet, no poison residue found by their own doctors, or at least none they are willing to admit to." "And the network?" "The German supplier has gone to ground. The financing channels in Geneva have gone silent. Without El Masri to hold the pieces together, the guidance system project is dead in the water. They don't have anyone else with his technical expertise and his level of trust." It was a clean win. A blue and white operation, as they called it. Flawless. But Avner felt the familiar hollowness that came after a mission. He had ended a man's life while the man was naked, vulnerable, seeking relief from pain. It was necessary. He believed that. The missiles would have targeted civilians. They would have carried gas. But the intimacy of the act, the proximity of Danny to the target, the silence of it, it weighed on him. "There is one loose end," the director said, breaking Avner's reverie. "The businessman?" "No, Sarah handled him. He thinks he had a romantic missed connection. He's telling his friends about the mysterious French woman who got away. No, the loose end is political." The director slid a photograph across the desk. It showed General El Masri shaking hands with a high-ranking American diplomat a week before his death. The Americans knew about the missile program. The director said softly. They were monitoring it. They wanted to use it as leverage against Cairo. By removing the general, we took away their leverage. "They'll be angry," Avner said. "They are furious. The station chief in Tel Aviv has requested a meeting. They want to know if we did it. What do we tell them? The director smiled, a cold, thin expression. We tell them nothing. We tell them we are as surprised as they are. We send condolences. We offer to share intelligence on who might have done such a thing. Perhaps the Libyans. Perhaps a rival faction in Cairo. It was the game within the game. Allies spied on allies. Friends sabotaged friends. And the truth was a currency that was never spent, only hoarded. Chapter 11. The Echo in the Desert. The death of General El-Masri did not end the threat of war, but it bought time. Time is the only victory intelligence agencies can ever truly claim. They do not win the war, they just delay the apocalypse. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the operation spread through the Middle East. The Egyptian military launched an internal investigation, purging officers they suspected of negligence or complicity. The German supplier was eventually arrested in Munich on tax evasion charges, a tip-off provided anonymously by an intelligence service that may or may not have been Israeli. Avner returned to his cover life. He went to the supermarket. He paid his bills. He watched the news. He saw the footage of the general's funeral, the weeping widow, the rows of medals on the velvet cushion. He wondered about the morality of the targeted prevention. Was it justice? Or was it simply the brutal logic of survival? He thought of the children in Tel Aviv who would sleep without air raid sirens because a man died in a jacuzzi in Rome. He held on to that thought. It was his shield. Danny, the technician who had pulled the trigger, took it harder. He requested a transfer to a training unit. He didn't want to be in the field anymore. He told Avner that he couldn't stand the smell of chlorine. It reminded him of the steam, the breathing, the intimacy of the kill. It's the silence, Danny said one evening over coffee. If it had been a gunfight, if he had shot back, it would be different. But he was just waiting. He wasn't waiting, Avner corrected him. He was planning. He was building a machine to kill thousands. You didn't kill a man, Danny. You dismantled a weapon. It was the rationalization they all used. It was true, and yet it was never quite enough to silence the ghosts. Chapter 12. The final ledger years passed. The cold peace held. The Berlin Wall fell. The world changed. The file on General El-Masri, codenamed Pharaoh's Shadow, was moved to the deep archives in the basement of the Mossad headquarters. It became history. But in the intelligence world, history is never just the past. It is the playbook for the future. The operation in Rome became a case study. It was taught to new cadets at the academy. It was dissected for its tradecraft, the use of infrastructure, the exploitation of medical vulnerability, the clean exfiltration. It was cited as the perfect example of kinetic diplomacy. One evening, decades later, a retired Avner sat on his porch in the Galilee. The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of purple and bruised orange. He was an old man now. The wars were fought by digital soldiers and drones. A car pulled up to his driveway. A young man got out. He didn't look like a spy. He looked like a tech entrepreneur. But Avner recognized the walk. "Sir," the young man said, "I'm from the history department. We are digitizing the old files. We wanted to ask about Rome." Avner looked at the young man. "What is there to ask? The file is complete." "The technology," the young man said. "The delivery system. We found the schematics for the pneumatic device. It was elegant." "It was a tool," Avner said, "like a hammer or a wrench." "Did you ever meet him?" the young man asked. "Before the operation, did you see him?" "I saw him," Avner said. "I saw him walking into the hotel. He looked like a grandfather." "And that didn't stop you?" Avner looked out at the darkening hills. "In this business, you don't look at the face. You look at the shadow they cast. His shadow was long. It covered my country." He stood up. The conversation was over. "Write down that it was a technical success," Avner said. "Write down that the objective was achieved, but don't write that it was easy. The ink on those files, it dries, but it never really fades." The young man nodded and left. Avner remained on the porch, listening to the crickets, listening to the silence of the night. It was a peaceful night. A night made possible by things done in the dark. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting second, He could hear the sound of bubbling water, the hiss of steam, and the quiet final exhale of a ghost in a Roman hotel room. Then he opened his eyes, looked at the lights of the valley below, and went inside to have dinner with his family.